Welcome to Open Range. I'm your host, Gary Amoneth. We're going to be talking to Dustin Gawrylow, who's been on regularly. He's the managing director of the Watchdog Network. He recently attended a conference with a bunch of conservatives, maybe even more libertarian, but we're going to talk about the conference. He's got a number of things he's been looking at related to the city of Bismarck, and I want to get just an update of where he sees the status of things at the Republican Party and some of the things going on around the state. So, Dustin, welcome once again to Open Range.
Good to be here.
So, talk to me a little bit about, you just got back from a conference. Talk to our viewers a little bit about it and what it was all about.
Yeah, so I attended the State Freedom Caucus National Summit down in Dallas, Texas. It's second annual. And a lot of people know the House Freedom Caucus was created by the conservatives in the U.S. Congress. And a few years ago, some of the leaders of the House Freedom Caucus got together and hired a guy named Andy Roth, who was formerly with the Club for Growth, to help launch a state network to develop a system and a group to support legislators at the state level who want to push forward conservative ideals that the Republican Party isn't necessarily doing themselves. And so I got tied in with the State Freedom Caucus Network back in 2024 when I was helping with the fight on the CO2 pipeline issue here in Bismarck. And the South Dakota Freedom Caucus was making that an issue themselves. So I was able to connect the dots and get a short-term contract-paying gig down there in South Dakota to kind of kill two birds with one stone and help them push that. That led to the referral in South Dakota where the voters of South Dakota rejected the power grab by the mainstream Republicans in South Dakota to take away power from the local governments when it comes to eminent domain. And that has then since metastasized into the Freedom Caucus has taken over the South Dakota legislature and the South Dakota Republican Party.
So the Freedom, for viewers out there, have no idea what Freedom Caucus is if they don't. Talk to a little bit about who they are, because some of us, I mean, like I knew about it through what you're doing in South Dakota, but we kind of see what goes on in Washington, and there were always that small group of maybe 20 legislators that kind of locked in and would challenge any, Republicans, liberals, whatever, and they held up a lot of legislation, pushed back at a number of things. Talk to us, for our viewers, a little bit about who they are and what that means.
Yeah, basically the Freedom Caucus is the current iteration of the group of conservatives that don't necessarily like the direction of the Republican Party, but are kind of fed in and linked in with the party. In North Dakota, prior to, say, 2010, we called them the Red Light District. When Rick Becker was in the legislature, we called them the Bastiat Caucus. So it's the same kind of thinking. Conservatives, libertarians that just don't think that the main line of the Republican Party does enough to adhere to the principles that it claims to believe in.
So they tend to focus on economic issues, tax issues. They're not necessarily pro-family, Christian, conservative type thing. They tend to be more financial-driven group, aren't they? Or not be true?
No. I think that my only critique of the Freedom Caucus is they probably go too far into the social issues. So they're across the board more conservative than the main line of the Republican Party. They're definitely not a libertarian-focused entity. There are libertarian-leaning people in that group because it's easier for them to associate with that faction than the moderate rhino type of mainliners in the Republican Party. But they're definitely not adverse to the social issues like some previous conservative groups are. And I mean, I don't lean that way myself, but you've got to work with whatever coalition you can work with. And on the CO2 pipeline issue, people need to understand that it was a left and right convergence coalition. We were dealing with like the Dakota Resource Council here in North Dakota, which is essentially backed by the Sierra Club. So when you've got the Sierra Club and the House Freedom Caucus, the State Freedom Caucus Network, all kind of converging onto one issue in a coalition manner to be successful, that's kind of the model. It's about being successful and working with whoever you need to work with to get things done, and generally it's fighting against the Republican Party.
It seems like on a national level that the Freedom Caucus is kind of not pushed back much. They've kind of been behind Trump. I think, in the past they've thrown out a few leaders, Kevin McCarthy, and that group has been more more vocal. It seems like Trump has kind of brought them in line a little bit. Do you think, have they compromised what they stood for, or is Trump closer to what they wanted to begin with, and they're satisfied that he's got a bully pulpit that he's beating pretty hard and getting people in line?
I think that there are people that ultimately in politics you end up compromising some of your positions no matter what. If you look at a guy like Rand Paul, he's not naturally aligned with somebody like Donald Trump, but he's more aligned with the Trump side of the party than, say, the John Boehner side of the party. And so it's a matter of lesser of two evils within the Republican Party when you're a conservative. So you kind of got to go with whoever's going to work with you.
So that's national level. Let's talk about the local level here in North Dakota. So you just came from this conference, and there were a number of people, legislators from various states. Mm-hmm. Was it
13 different states?
13 different states had various legislators there.
Yep.
And is this Freedom Caucus, does that mean they have 13 statewide networks today, or do they have 25 and they're just slowly building legislators into that mix?
So right now, officially, there are 13 states that have Freedom Caucuses. Most of them are red states. Some of them are blue states. But typically, the Freedom Caucus is most vocal and loud when they're fighting within the Republican Party. In Wyoming, they took over the party and the House 1 year before the South Dakota crew was able to do that. And so it all depends on the dynamics in the state. And what we learned is that states that are the hyper red Republican states actually have the most problems when it comes to implementing the policies that Republicans and conservatives claim to have when they get elected. Getting elected, all of that goes to the wayside, and if there's not an entity that has the cohesion and the critical mass to fight back and say, listen, we were elected to do X, Y, Z, let's do it, then the party really doesn't mean anything.
So if you take the state of North Dakota, I see that the conservatives, that would be Bastiat, if you will, and I hate to use that because it's been wrecked. I don't think people were as out of line as the moderate Republicans label them in the local media, and some of the bloggers, and even Scott Hannon, who has a show on Beck, he'll talk about their tiny majority, if you will. And Scott used to be in that circle. I don't think he's as much there as he used to be. He and I talk about it. But if you take the state of North Dakota, the Republican Party now with the new chairman, that is really that conservative libertarian part of the party that has control of the party infrastructure, but they have not got control of the legislature. Correct. Where they have the leadership and the committee chairman. And you're saying South Dakota has, Wyoming has, where that Freedom Caucus or that conservative group, which I have to say I'm a part of, that would be where I would lean. They have not done it in North Dakota legislature, but I think they're on the verge of getting something. Term limits is going to drive some of that possibly. Mm-hmm. But you're saying South Dakota has. They've really gotten control of the Freedom Caucus, that conservative group of South Dakota and Wyoming.
Yeah. So in Wyoming, the official core group of Freedom Caucus is well over 40. So they more openly were able to take things over earlier. In South Dakota, it's a mix of, you've got the loud, public, outspoken core group, and then you've got those that would rather align and ally with the Freedom Caucus than the typical moderate crowd. And the CO2 pipeline and property rights has really caused that coalition to come together. The question is, how long does it last? In North Dakota, I think that in the House, there are probably 15 to 18 members that are would be considered Freedom Caucus if we had one, and then maybe another 15 that would be allied or adjacent on issue by issue. And so we're probably pushing up against where it would be viable to have such a thing. It's just a matter of having the leadership to do it. And as we saw during the era with the Bastiat Caucus, that relied on Rick Becker holding things together. It was too focused on one person holding everything together. And the general consensus on all of these groups is that you can't rely on one person to do everything.
Because your point is when that happens and the person, like in the case of Rick Becker, decides to run for statewide office, or he decides I'm not running for the legislature, they lose that power base and now they struggle for who's the next leader.
Yep.
So in other words, if you're not kind of a group that's kind of democratic, if you will, in a sense of being kind of a broader group, that's where you run into trouble, is what you're saying.
Yeah.
So
Conservative groups have always had an issue of succession, of relying on one person, keeping things together, and then not grooming the people coming up. There's, we've got a lot of starters, but not a lot of bench players.
I see. Well, we're going to go to the break, and we come back. I want to pick up a little bit on that conference and talk about some of the things that they're talking about on the national level with the Freedom Caucus. So we've been talking to Dustin Gawrylow, Managing Director of the Watchdog Network. I'm your host, Gary Emmett. Stay tuned. We'll be right back.
Stop out to our facility, Highway 22 South. Let us build a truck for you.
Hello and welcome to the MHA Interpretive Center. It's the perfect stop along the Lewis and Clark Trail and the cultural hub of the Mandan, Hiraadza, and Arikara Nation. Nestled along the shores of Lake Sagagawea in Newtown, North Dakota, 1 mile west of the Four Bears Casino. You can enjoy amphitheater performances, art exhibitions, and educational workshops utilizing our Living Cultural Center. Enjoy some coffee, browse our gift shop, and learn about the original people of this land. Learn more at mhanation.com/interpretive center.
Welcome to Arrowhead Cleaners. Newly renovated, modernized, and ready to make your cleaning needs hassle-free. From commercial and residential wash and fold laundry services to the latest in professional dry cleaning techniques, we are dedicated to your unique needs, offering alterations, fabrications, and even custom hat making. So whether you're a busy professional, a family on the go, or even a rodeo champion, Arrowhead Cleaners is here to take your things from messed up to dressed up. Now celebrating our 64th year in Arrowhead Plaza.
Home on the Range offers a nurturing place for teens who may have just come from an unsafe or traumatic environment. Here, they receive therapy and education services centered around animals, and the surrounding nature provides opportunities for work, fun, and healing. Life skills learned at Home on the Range are carried with residents when they return to the community with new talents and a greater appreciation for themselves and others.
Are you dealing with arthritis, nerve and back pain, dry skin, or superficial wounds, but found no relief? Give Stewart's Natural Health a try. For over 4 decades, Stewart's Natural Health has been helping people and animals with herbal and natural oil lotions, ointments, and creams with a mission to help you relieve pain and feel your best using the power of nature. Discover the safe, drug-free solution to your pain, guaranteed or your money back. Visit stewartsnatural.health today.
West River Equipment of Mandan is here to help you maintain peak productivity in your operation. As an authorized dealer for many high-quality equipment lines, we have the new and used equipment it takes to make your farming, ranching, or construction operation profitable and efficient. West River Equipment also has the parts on hand and the experienced technicians in our shop to get your equipment back in action fast. Find what you need at West River Equipment on Old Red Trail in Mandan.
Welcome to Open Range. I'm your host, Gary Emmett. We're talking to Dustin Gawrylow, who's the Managing Director of the Watchdog Network. Wanted to follow back up from a conference you had. So Dustin, talk to me a little bit about your conference and kind of some of the speakers and some of the mindset of what's coming out of the Freedom Caucus.
Yeah, so the keynote speakers, Florida Governor Ron DeSantis, Homeland Security Director, or I guess, I forget his title, ICE Director Tom Homan, in charge of the deportation program. But generally, the business breakout sessions were, number one, letting the legislators and people involved at the state levels to get in the rooms and talk about what they're dealing with in their individual states. And in a lot of ways, it was broken down mostly by region. So North Dakota didn't have a seat at table other than me, but South Dakota, Wyoming, Montana, Idaho were kind of one region, talking about the issues that we're dealing with and talking about the strategies of how are you dealing with media, how are you dealing with the Republican Party itself. In some states like Missouri, and South Carolina, the Republican parties have essentially excommunicated anybody who associates with the Freedom Caucus. In South Carolina, they've officially been expelled from the Republican caucus. And so being a Freedom Caucus member and trying to push conservatism within the Republican Party in certain states is very dangerous.
Well, that's crazy because, I mean, when you talk to South Carolina, it's a pretty conservative state, you know. So speaking of it, I got a little mascot here that I put up on top of Bolawa the buffalo. It's a little rhinoceros. So he's a green rhinoceros. Oop, I got my blocking the view there with my hand there. It's a rhinoceros, but it's a rhino eraser. So it's something that I had. So we got all these rhinos in the party. I thought I'd bring my eraser along because there's times we need to do some cleaning up. And there went my rhino. He just jumped off the back of Bolawa. So talk to me a little bit about what they're thinking of is related to kind of the more moderate element in the Republican Party. What is their mindset when they come to push back on that?
Well, the moderate Republicans in these various parties are just concerned about retaining power. It's not about passing good conservative legislation. It's about maintaining power. In a place like South Carolina, where the tradition, you go back, 60 years when, the Conservative Party was the Democratic Party, and that, you had the Dixiecrats split off. They took over the Republican Party, very similar to the way that the Socialists took over the Republican Party in North Dakota in the 19-teens. So it's a personality dynamic and it's a power dynamic, because political parties in different states don't mean or do the same thing. And we're really finding out, even here in the upper Midwest, that the party doesn't necessarily exist or the elected officials that are part of the Republican Party are not a part of the Republican Party necessarily to promote Republican policies and principles. They are part of the Republican Party because Democrats can't get elected. And we've always known that. That's the most basic definition of rhino. But now it's just becoming more and more clear. The South Dakota dynamic, where the conservatives that were against the corporate welfare cronyism and the Republican Green New Deal when it comes to the CO2 pipeline, are now in charge of the party, and the old guard is on the outside looking in and trying to figure out ways to diminish the party's ability to really have influence.
So if you take South Dakota, let's stay with that a little bit, because you were down there working the session. Kristi Noem, governor, now she's heading up Homeland Security, dealing with all the raids and the border and dealing with the security around that. What would be the perception of the Conservative Freedom Caucus with Kristi Noem and the legislators? Would they? I mean, she sold herself the air as this really staunch conservative. Was she really there?
I mean, it depends on who you ask. I think that most of the conservatives in South Dakota are very disappointed in her, primarily because the way that she acted did not match the rhetoric. They had situations where there's overt corruption with her daughter and the real estate deals. There was a situation with the credit card spending on the state credit card, where she was basically globetrotting on South Dakota taxpayers' dime. One of the big things that I heard in my time down there was during COVID and during the shutdowns, for about 2 weeks, she was going along with it, and she had to be pushed into not doing the shutdowns. And then once she was pushed into it, she acted like she was always against it when she wasn't, because she was trying to give her health department new powers until the conservatives in the legislature pushed back. And so there is a disingenuousness amongst a lot of folks when it comes to Kristi Noem.
Interesting. And so do you think, in say South Dakota, because I think there's parallels that could be in play for North Dakota, I think, and tell me if that would be true. Do you feel that the Freedom Caucus that's in play and power in South Dakota, are they going to get stronger, or are they going to is the rising up of the traditional moderate middle of the road Republicans, I call them the Rockefeller Republicans, if you will, are they pushing back hard enough? Because I think in North Dakota, that middle of the road Republican, because and I say it because of the oil industry, and I'm a big fan of energy and development that's gone on, but their play in it they've got all those guys taken care of so that they support everything the oil industry wants. And like I said, I'm a big supporter of it, but it seems like those people in power then bring all that money to the table to keep out a conservative that would question a CO2 pipeline or something of that nature.
Yeah, in South Dakota, the money, especially the oil money, is not there yet. So the ability of the conservatives and the Freedom Caucus in South Dakota to maintain is going to be completely contingent upon if the money comes in and attacks them. One of the reasons that in North Dakota, the anti-CO2 pipeline and anti-Green New Deal, when it comes to the Republican approach to it, has not taken off is because of the oil money, because of Harold Hamm. One of the big topics at this conference was the danger of the net zero policies that were going around. And I brought up several times, and it was mentioned several times, that North Dakota is one of the net zero states. And that was one of Doug Burgum's goals, is to make North Dakota net zero on carbon by 2030. And neither he nor Kelly Armstrong have rescinded that goal. And so a lot of conservatives who know about Doug Burgum are very concerned that he, within the Trump administration, is going to have the influence to diminish the opposition to those net zero carbon policies, because in North Dakota, the Republican Green New Deal for corporate profit is such a strong thing, because the entire state infrastructure has been set up to support the oil industry's ability to take advantage of these terrible Green New Deal policies.
So if you take Doug Burgum out there, I just saw that he is pushing towards freeing up some of the federal land for drilling. It seems to me that his environmental mindset has pivoted a little bit, and I don't know if it was related to him positioning to run for president when he did that. Was it because that's where he really is? Is he just getting in line with Trump for the season? What would be your take on that?
I think it's all about power and all about getting in position to be able to be in a higher level in the next administration. We saw him giving J.D. Vance a guided tour of Medora and the Teddy Roosevelt Library. Well, it's been my belief that since day one, the goal of that library was to be able to host Republican presidential debates, just like the Reagan Library and just like the Nixon Library do. And so the idea of creating this cohesion and coalition with that crowd, he's very good at it. He's very good at alleviating those concerns. But if you ask the policy people that are tracking it, there's a lot of fear that he could mainstream the Republican Green New Deal for corporate profit and make it so that it's all about hijacking the environmental policies of the left in order to make those policies help create profit for the corporate interests on the right.
So I've interviewed Chris Wright. I've watched him long before I ever had a chance to interview him, but he I mean, he is very sensitive about the environment, but he is very pro-fracking. That's obviously his company, Liberty Energy, and involved with LNG exports and just opening things up, because his Chris Wright's point is that everybody in the world, there's 1 billion that want to be like Americans, and that includes us, that have this freedom, liberty, and this economic standard that we have. The other 6-7 billion that aspire to that, and they're not going to just go back to cook stoves if they don't have to, kind of thing. So I just think Chris Wright is going to push back on that pretty hard. I guess the question, to your point, and I think this is what maybe you're saying, if Doug decides to make a run for president again or becomes a vice presidential running mate, he has positioned himself with because you don't get the endorsement and don't do what Trump's been able to do. You don't become the nominee, you aren't president. He got up to 1% or whatever that number was. And if you don't get any further than that, you're never going to be the candidate.
The energy industry has taken a if you can't beat them, join them approach to the environmental side of this issue. And so by joining them, that means they want to profit from the policies. That's what the 45Q tax credit is all about. That's why Harold Hamm is the 25% investor in Summit Carbon Solutions. They look at this that they can't stop this from happening, so they might as well make money off of it. And Doug Burgum is their front man.
So we're going to go to the break. We come back, we're going to pick up on a little bit on it. We've been talking to Dustin Gawrylow, Managing Director of Watchdog Network. I'm your host, Gary Emmett. Stay tuned. We'll be right back.
Base Flug Trailers of Dickinson is a family-owned dealer with expert staff that know their products front to back. We stock over 150 units of all types and can custom order a trailer with the unique features and capabilities you require for brands you can trust. Our experienced service team is the reason we're also the best place to have your trailer customized or repaired. Count on Base Flug Trailers of Dickinson to keep you hauling.
Are you looking for something special or one of a kind? At Bassett Motors, we can help you find exactly what you want.
Come on in and experience how small-town hospitality and personal service can make car buying a pleasure.
We know interest rates are important to you. We have multiple lenders to negotiate your lowest payment.
Visit us on Highway 281 in Carrington, North Dakota, and online at BassettMotors.com. Bassett Motors, where our customers send their friends.
Yeah, U.S. Cattlemen is a member organization that each member has a vote in anything we do with policy. We're representing the independent cattleman or the cow-calf guy or an independent feeder or whatever. We like to support the independent producer. Talking about mandatory ID, we're talking about cool, we're talking about all the legislation that's going to be coming down with the new administration. There's going to be lots of moving and shaking, so always check us out at our website, uscattleman.org.
I'm $27,000 in credit card debt.
Okay.
You have to radically do something different, because if you keep doing what you've been doing, you're going to keep getting what you've been getting.
Now's not the time to be doing math. The time to be doing math was when we didn't go under $200,000 in debt.
If you are freaked out and you're stuck in these debt payments and you think it has to be a part of your life, it doesn't.
We're the ladies of Another View. Join us at 9 a.m. weekday mornings.
We'll discuss issues you care about from local and national perspectives.
You'll hear unique stories from fellow North Dakotans, plus topics in the national spotlight.
Start your day off right with Ladies of Another View.
Weekdays at 9 a.m. on Beck TV and online at beck.news.
Welcome back to Open Range. I'm your host, Gary. I'm talking to Dustin Gawrylow of the Watchdog Network. Dustin, we've been talking about national stuff. I'd like to pivot a little bit and talk about more local stuff. Bismarck, Burleigh County. You've been on top of a lot of that stuff. You've seen a lot happening. Give us an update.
So in the last 6 months, we've seen the city of Bismarck and Burleigh County really take the extraterritorial zone issue seriously. This was an issue that has been festering for decades, in fact, which the extraterritorial zone is an area that is up to 4 miles around a city, and in Bismarck it's up to 2 miles because the city has agreed not to go out the full 4 miles. I was first exposed to this issue back in 2011 with former Representative Dwight Wrangham when he was the chair of the political subcommittee. This was one of his pet issues, was reforming the extraterritorial zone policies that allow cities to dictate rules for zoning and permits outside of their jurisdiction, and the people who are under their regulatory their thumb don't have the ability to vote. So this is where the phrase regulation without representation comes from. So you are under the rule of the city, but you don't get to vote for the city. And in 2022, when I ran for county commission, this was my #1 issue, was tackling this, because this issue at the local level outside of Bismarck is probably the #1 sticking point that causes strife between the county and the city. And City Commissioner Mike Connolly actually earlier this year took the initiative to propose bringing together both commissions to discuss this issue, and they're slowly developing a dialogue on this. But at the last meeting that they had together, the city staff agreed that there's a lot of territory that it's just not in the interest of Bismarck to control, because they don't really want to expand out to there. So they've actually proposed a plan to release up to 50% of the land outside of the city that the city of Bismarck has jurisdiction over without having it be in the city. And that would reduce and release 94% of the homes. So it would pretty much dissolve the problem of the people who are complaining about the city ruling over them when they don't have a say in the matter. When they announced this, I took this as a very good positive, because we've had trouble getting them to take this issue seriously. And if they're willing to release half the land and 94% of the people and their homes, then that's a pretty good starting point for a negotiation to fix this problem.
Well, it is, because, I mean, I had Mike Connolly on one of our earlier shows, and County Commissioner Steve Bakken, who was former mayor of Bismarck, of course, and we talked about it. And I mean, Steve cited an example where these become issues. So I have a house out in this ETZ, so that I'm sitting out there with the shop, and I decide that I want to do some work on it. And pretty soon they say, well, you can't do it because you have to have a concrete floor, and maybe you might have to have a sprinkler system, whether it's a shop, condo, and there's a number of things the county does not require, but city limits. It's a little tighter restrictions, and I get that, why they would want to do that. So there are these, private right citizen issues that have done something, and then all of a sudden the rules change, and they go, well, wait a minute, I don't have the resource to spend an extra $22,000 for a concrete, floor. Because I just want to put my boat in there, and I just want a covering. I don't care about, and so those kind of things become really sticking points, don't they?
They do, and over the years we've seen several waves of angst when the city goes out and tries to enforce those things. 'Cause they can put in these rules, but they don't have an enforcement mechanism. Like the Bismarck PD can't go out and issue, tickets or summonses outside the city limits, and the county is not going to give the sheriff's department permission to enforce Bismarck's laws. And so it's this weird, it's almost a type of anarchy. It's like a government-imposed anarchy, which is kind of a contradiction in terms, but that's how I view it, is that the city wants to control things but doesn't really have the power to do it, and the people out in the county just don't have the personalities to ignore what their governments are telling them. And I think that if this deal does not come through, you're going to see a lot of civil disobedience where people are just going to build what they want to build, comply with the county rules, and completely disregard what the city wants. So I think in the long run, the city giving up the bulk of the land that's already occupied does two things. It eliminates the complainers, and then number two, when there's less land available for development, that means that the landowners are going to be able to sell their land for more. And so they're going to make more money off of it. And when the people that own the land are making more money off the deal, they're going to complain less too. So it's kind of a win-win-win situation as long as they can come up with this solution that actually will work for most, if not all, of the people out there.
Well, I'm encouraged that the city of Bismarck would take that position. I mean, you seldom see that. I mean, where government's willing to give something up. It seemed like once they got control, they only just want another piece more.
And it came from the bureaucrats. This is the other irony, is that the commissioners, even the commissioners that knew that this is a problem, they didn't know what to do about it. And when I think a lot of it goes back to Steve Bakken, because he was mayor and proposing this in one of the meetings, they started looking at it. And Commissioner Connolly and I had a meeting with some of the city staff, and I said, you guys don't need this problem anymore. So look at what areas do you really want to be involved with. A couple of years ago, under Steve Bakken, when he was mayor, they did the 2045 comprehensive plan, and I was on one of the focus groups for that. And there was some engineers that were saying how in order for Bismarck to keep growing north, we're going to have to build a completely separate water system, a completely separate sewer system. And I said, wait, why does Bismarck need to build a second system? Like, if there's a need for a second system, there's a need for a second city. Bismarck does not have to take on the risk and burden of providing for everybody in the county. So the people that are outside of the city limits of Bismarck, they have the opportunity to start their own cities. There was rumors 10, 15 years ago that the law said that you couldn't start a city, and that's not true. If people wanted to, they could. And actually, the county has more input and control over that than the surrounding cities. So ultimately, if for whatever reason Bismarck and Burleigh County can't figure out this problem, the nuclear option is for people to organize and start their own cities out there.
Are there other cities and counties? Are you aware of any other situation that the people are working through? I mean, I'm encouraged by the city and the county deciding we're going to try to get somewhere. My hat's off to Mike Connolly and Steve Bakken taking lead on that. Is there other issues like this around the state that is high profile? Because I know Fargo can tend to be that way. They like to control their universe.
And over the years, there's been a Jamestown incident and Grand Forks incidents. But right now, the timing is odd, where you've got Fargo and Harwood fighting over this AI data center that's in the Harwood extraterritorial zone, but Fargo wants to annex it. So Fargo's going to, if they get their way, they're going to annex all the way into the Harwood extraterritorial zone where Harwood wanted to grow into, which is kind of similar to the way, if you look at the map around Lincoln, Bismarck's kind of surrounding Lincoln, and they've got their own extraterritorial zone, but Bismarck's kind of engulfing them. It's kind of the same sort of mentality. So I think ultimately, the issues that happen in Bismarck and Burleigh County get a lot more publicity because it's the capital. There's more people like me around here that are involved in a higher level, and it's generally, more conservative approach to things, and that's why we're having this real rift here of corporate conservatism versus philosophical conservatism, and those are two very different things. That is kind of an overarching theme when it comes to the CO2 pipeline, to the Republican Green New Deal, and to this AI data center situation, because we're seeing that the concept that growth at any cost is not necessarily a good policy. And it's always been the policy of Republicans and conservatives to just support growth and deal with the repercussions later. And I think people are realizing, no, we need to consider what we're doing now and figure out if we really want to go down this road and address the issues that we know are going to come down later.
Do you think that the mindset in North Dakota, because we've had so much money in the last decade, that there's been property right issues, whether they're mineral right owners, whether they're land guys tired of, I don't have mineral rights, but I don't like what they're doing with the roads. And do you think there's some of that pushback? I call it just fatigue, real estate landowner fatigue, that have just been tired of somebody coming and asking, and they basically get their way every time. They just kind of keep grabbing more, almost, even though it's not government, it's almost industry.
It's quasi-governmental. Yeah, I think there's a lot of that. And you know, I've seen, and I've been writing about this problem for a couple years now. If you look at the GDP of North Dakota going back to 2014 and you adjust it for inflation, it has not grown. So there's this perception that we've got all this growth, all of this building going on. But the economy itself, when you use the Federal Reserve's own numbers on an inflation basis, it has not moved up at all. We are flat. And the only thing that has been keeping the economy afloat is the injection of the oil money. If the oil money goes away, we go into permanent recession. I mean, technically, by being flat on an inflation basis, we are in a recession. But there's just so much cash flow that it's kind of covering that up.
Yeah.
And the fact that nobody is really analyzing these numbers doesn't help either.
You know, we're going to go to the break. We come back. I want to pivot a little bit again. I think this is fascinating to think about our economy that's actually flat because we've been thinking so differently for so long. So we've been talking to Dustin Gawrylow, Watchdog Network Managing Director. I'm your host, Gary Emmett. Stay tuned. We'll be right back.
Hey, y'all. It's Trent on the loose. I want to tell you, Lady Blue and I, we got a lot of miles together. But you know what? You and I got a lot of miles together as well. And all I want to do is bring to you the information on how we maintain a domestic supply of food and fuel for future generations. So I'm going to continue to travel the world and unearth the stories that make it possible that we can live in a free United States of America.
Welcome to Arrowhead Cleaners. Newly renovated, modernized, and ready to make your cleaning needs hassle-free. From commercial and residential wash and fold laundry services to the latest in professional dry cleaning techniques, we are dedicated to your unique needs, offering alterations, fabrications, and even custom hat making. So whether you're a busy professional, a family on the go, or even a rodeo champion, Arrowhead Cleaners is here to take your things from messed up to dressed up. Now celebrating our 64th year in Arrowhead Plaza. Are you dealing with arthritis, nerve and back pain, dry skin, or superficial wounds, but found no relief? Give Stewart's Natural Health a try. For over 4 decades, Stewart's Natural Health has been helping people and animals with herbal and natural oil lotions, ointments, and creams with a mission to help you relieve pain and feel your best using the power of nature. Discover the safe, drug-free solution to your pain, guaranteed or your money back. Visit stewartsnatural.health today.
West River Equipment of Mandan is here to help you maintain peak productivity in your operation. As an authorized dealer for many high-quality equipment lines, we have the new and used equipment it takes to make your farming, ranching, or construction operation profitable and efficient. West River Equipment also has the parts on hand and the experienced technicians in our shop to get your equipment back in action fast. Find what you need at West River Equipment on Old Red Trail in Mandan.
At Schatz Crossroads, we make 8 gallons of homemade ranch dressing every day, so you can smother your dinner salad with it, dip those crispy golden French fries in it, and dunk your breaded chicken strips. You can even cover your... Wait, no, you can't put ranch on steak, or can you? Schatz Crossroads, don't forget the ranch.
Since 1980, Circle Sanitation has been providing exceptional waste hauling services to every customer, big or small. Whether you just need reliable weekly pickup, roll-off containers for major projects at home or the construction site, or your needs are somewhere in between, Circle Sanitation has you covered. We're a locally owned family business and currently seeking dependable men and women to add to our team. Wages are competitive and benefits comprehensive. Call us today or visit circlesanitation.com.
Welcome back to Open Range. I'm your host, Gary. I'm going to talk to Dustin Gawrylow, Managing Director of the Watchdog Network. So, Dustin, I would like to pivot a little bit, and let's talk about the Ethics Commission. So I'm going to be having Rebecca Binstock, who's the director, on as well, talking about what's come from their annual report. But you've kind of kept a close eye on some of these ethic complaints against, I mean, mostly Republicans, because there are no Democrats, so you can't. So if there's going to be any violation, it's going to typically always be Republicans. And so talk to us a little bit about what you know about that.
Yeah, you know, when I was at the Freedom Caucus Summit, I repeated my catchphrase that I like to use, which is, I wish there were more Democrats to go after. I'm tired of going after Republicans, but it's just the way it is. The Ethics Commission is, I think, one of the biggest quagmires that Republicans have dug themselves into, and they need to figure out how to get out of it. So the people voted in favor of the ballot measure in 2018 to create the Ethics Commission. I actually advocated a vote no on that measure because I was concerned about the repercussions of the dark money rules and how a lot of my donors, because I'm 501c3 with the North Dakota Watchdog Network, they donate because specifically it's not disclosed, because they want to do things that the levels of government that they want to fix, they don't want to see blowback. And so even though I was opposed to the Ethics Commission originally when it was on the ballot because of the way that it was set up, once it's in the Constitution, we have to support enacting and executing it the way that the voters intended and the way that the Constitution expects. And ever since it was passed in 2019, the Republican legislators have done everything they can do to make sure that it doesn't do what the people expected, doesn't do what it should be doing as far as keeping them accountable, and that have gotten in the way of funding it to actually operate. They're operating on a shoestring budget. And, you know, last session, there was a bill that would have put a 180-day deadline on Ethics Commission complaints. Meanwhile, the legislature rejected the idea of giving them more people to do the work. And those two things together have the appearance of cover-up. They're trying to get in the way of the Ethics Commission doing its job. And so more recently, we've seen this fight between Ethics Commission staff and the Attorney General's office. Senate Majority Leader David Hogue has had a little bit of a back and forth with them. And it just seems like Republicans cannot figure out how to get out of their own way on the public relations side of this. And they can't realize that they're making it look like they're hiding something. And one of the claims was, well, they're sitting on all these complaints and not doing anything about it. Well, a lot of those complaints are rejected very quickly. But a lot of the complaints are big issues. Like I filed a complaint against former state representative Emily O'Brien over the way that she was profiting from the Bioscience Association in North Dakota, which was purely funded by state money, and how she advocated and lobbied for that organization and for more money when she knew that that was going to go to herself. The Ethics Commission has had that since May of 2024. So we're approaching 500 days that they've had that. Now there's been a complication in that, which is she's resigned from the legislature. She's now the Deputy Director of North Dakota Human Services. And the staff at the Ethics Commission may or may not be able to do anything. We don't know. I've asked them, is she still under your purview? And I was told, we got to look into it. So a lot of the things that Republicans are doing on the Ethics Commission just look like they don't want it to do its job because it's going to go after their members. And part of transparency and part of open government is making sure that you put in place the mechanisms to keep yourself honest.
That's a good way of putting it, because when it comes down to it and they push back and they do these little things, sometimes perception becomes reality because the average person out there goes, well, why are you not talking about it? I mean, it's like I've gotten regular calls in the last few weeks about, hey, what's happened with this Ray Holmberg thing? What about Wayne Stenjum? And whether there's anything going on or not, I have no idea. But what happens is it seems like there's sometimes you need closure, and people want to see what the result was so I can kind of move on. And when that doesn't happen, like in the case of Emily O'Brien, it sits out there twisting in the wind. And now she's the number 2 person in the agency with the biggest state budget. And you're saying if there's ethic issues there or ethical things, should she be in that position? And do they have any way to come back after? That's a very valid question.
Yeah. And you know, all of this goes back to the Jason Doctor situation, who's the only one that has faced any repercussions. And, you know, Republicans think that it was overblown, and in some ways it may have been, but it took 4 years start to finish on that whole process. And ironically, it was the work that the Attorney General's office, when Drew Wrigley took over, did that opened the door to a lot of this. It was all rumor and speculation before that. There were whispers for many, many years about him and a few other state reps that you and I both know, but there's not a lot of proof. There's not a lot of documentation, and it's hard to do that. So it was ironically the work that the Attorney General's office was doing, figuring out what happened before Wayne Stenjum passed away, that led to that. But the Ethics Commission has been made the boogeyman in that whole thing, when in fact, likely, if there were legal issues, it probably would have resulted in legal action even if the Ethics Commission didn't exist.
They don't really have any teeth with it. I mean,
No,
all
they
they
don't.
can do is issue a report and say this happened, but, you know, what are you going to do about it? Legislator or whoever says, I'm not resigning, you know, Jason Doctor, I'm not resigning. I mean, whether he should or shouldn't, that's a whole nother issue, but there's no power there to do anything with it. They turn it over to the state's attorney, who might then say, well, I'm not going to do anything. It's a friend of mine or whatever. And so that really becomes where citizens just say, I've had enough of this.
Yeah, and to me, a lot of this is compounded because we had 2 legislative sessions, maybe more, where House Republicans specifically were going after Josh Gallion and the auditor's office for doing their job too well and for being too loud about the findings. And, you know, there was a push in 2019 to refer some of the actions taken by the legislature on the auditor's office. There's been discussions about making, putting in the Constitution an automatic funding mechanism for the auditor's office to kind of disconnect it from legislative whims. And I think in a lot of ways, the Ethics Commission is in the same territory. These are constitutional bodies. They should not be handcuffed because political actors don't like what they might find. And so from my aspect, I think that ultimately we're going to see a measure that enhances the Ethics Commission's powers, disconnects it and gives it dedicated funding, and may actually duplicate that onto the auditor's office. And much like how for 3 or 4 sessions, Cory Mock had put forward Ethics Commission rules in the legislature and Republicans rejected them, I think that it would be smart for legislative Republicans to fix this problem themselves, because if they wait for the public to use a ballot measure to fix these problems, they're not going to like the results any more than they liked the results in 2018 when the public voted for the Ethics Commission in the first place. So fix the problem and stop trying to play hide and go seek with this information. Yeah, you might lose a few legislators in the process because they're doing things that they shouldn't and they're not being forthright about it. But wouldn't that be a good thing to prove that you're above board? Like, if you're not willing to do that, if you're not willing to open yourselves up to that scrutiny, then you're acting guilty even if you're not guilty.
Well, you know, it's interesting. I mean, I never really believed it was true. I'd never really seen it to that degree, but North Dakota tends to be very high on a national scale of corruption within our politics. And you kind of go, really? I mean, it's like, but because our laws are so lax and because they give them so much freedom, And the initiative by the legislators to push back, they really set themselves up for it because of that lack of transparency.
Yeah, they do. And a lot of when you see those corruption reports, that goes back to the lack of disclosure, lack of transparency, lack of contribution limits. But it also goes to the fact that there's no enforcement. We have laws on the books that aren't enforced. The entire open records, open meetings section of law, it's designed that the Attorney General will issue an opinion saying some city commission broke the law, but there's nothing after that. That's it. It's a slap on the wrist and a bad headline for 2 days, and everybody forgets about it. And there was an effort during Wayne Stenjum's time to put in the legislature some fines on the elected officials on these bodies that violate the law. That never went anywhere. There was supposedly going to be a task force to look at these things, but nothing ever came of it. And so the question comes up, if we're not going to enforce these laws, why do we have them on the books? Because if they're just there to be there, I've had situations where I had a school board dead to rights that they violated the law and spent $40,000 promoting a ballot measure, which is against the law. They gave the money to a private company to do it, to separate themselves from it. I called 4 states' attorneys' offices asking them to look into this. No state's attorney wanted to do it. I, as a private citizen, was forced to shop for a state's attorney to try to enforce the law, because the law is not self-enforcing. The law does not require law enforcement and the judicial system to actually enforce what it is supposed to enforce. And if the citizens are put in a position of having to find a state's attorney willing to enforce the law, then the law is useless.
Well, it kind of goes back to North Dakota nice. We all know each other. We're all neighbors. And I go to church with that person. My son plays basketball with his, whatever. So that always becomes a challenge. Dustin, as always, I appreciate you coming on Open Range and talking through all these issues. We're going to be back again as we regularly do. So we've been talking to Dustin Gawrylow, Managing Director of Watchdog Network. I'm your host, Gary Emna. Thanks for watching.
We're the ladies of Another View. Join us at 9 a.m. weekday mornings.
We'll discuss issues you care about from local and national perspectives.
You'll hear unique stories from fellow North Dakotans, plus topics in the national spotlight.
Start your day off right with Ladies of Another View.
Weekdays at 9 a.m. on Beck TV and online at beck.news.
Now you can have the personalized forecast at your fingertips when you need it. Beck's exclusive Weather Insight is information tailored to you. Radar, weather alerts, forecasts, and videos. Download the free Weather on Beck News app. Search your app store now.
Hey y'all, it's Trent on the loose. Join me on the trip and unearth the stories on how we maintain a domestic supply of food and fuel for future generations of American citizens like our forefathers did.